directly and not through a glass darkly, as they say. So it's a great privilege to come and speak to you today. I bring you greetings from Cambridge in the UK, from my church and community there. I have one colleague with me here. I hope you may get a chance to speak to him in a few minutes. He's a former student here at Hendon, and now he works with me every day in my office in Cambridge. And he comes here to help me with arrangements and translation, but he's also a trained pharmacist, so he's my traveling doctor. He's done 5 years in IT, so he's my traveling IT specialist. So he does all those things, Stephen, so he's sitting at the back. And you might stand up, Stephen, and then hopefully people will get to chat to you sometime. And Stephen is inspired to work on peace between North and South Korea. I think that inspiration may be partly coming from Hendon itself. So maybe the thing has come full circle back to you now. You train the students, they help us to do things, and also the reason that this book has been written, you should blame Mr. Young-Jun Park, because when I explained first of all in the President's office here about this biblical mission for reunification of Korea, he said to me, you must write it down. But also a very senior diplomat from North Korea, who I met overseas, he said to me, you must write it down. So someone from South Korea, someone from North Korea, both said to me, a British person, you must write down why and how you think this could happen. And you need to know that I'm not primarily an academic. I have a PhD and I'm trained in academia. But I'm primarily here because I want to see this happen. I want to see reunification happen. So I'm working with various governments to try and get this to happen. But you have to work with China, Russia, Japan, and of course US, if this is going to happen. And that's why I think there is a particular role for a foreigner like myself to play some role in the reunification process. I'm not a Korean. And I always feel embarrassed that here I am talking about Korea, but I'm not a Korean. And you know your culture so much better than me. But this is my calling from the Lord. I'm absolutely sure the Lord called me here in 2017 to work and made me drop everything else so I could work only on peace in Korea. So for 5 years, after I've left everything else I was doing, I've just been working, well, almost everything, I've just been working on peace in Korea. And this book comes at the end of 5 years, but that doesn't mean I stop. No, because it's only the foundation for now getting the process to actually begin. So I want you to understand that I'm expecting to see the start of this reunification process starting soon, and I'll explain in my talk how that can happen. So please believe in faith. If you believe in faith this is going to happen, then you will see how it could happen. I also must acknowledge Dr. Cho's wife. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name yourself, but she helped me with the chapter on North Korean justice system when we were writing. I'm grateful to you always for that. Thank you so much. So I wanted to start with this verse, and time is short, so I should go actually quickly. But I wanted to start with this verse, which I was reading recently. Jesus meets a blind man, and the disciples ask, was he born blind? Was it his parents' fault? Was it his fault? Whose fault? And Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so the work of God might be displayed in his life. That's what it says. And I've asked myself many times, why did God allow Korea to be divided like this? Pyongyang used to be called the Jerusalem of the East. And now look at it. Why did God allow this to happen? Well, this happened so the work of God might be displayed, I think, in the nation's life, the nation of Korea. So I believe that God will use Korea to to demonstrate to the world how you can build one society out of a communist state and a capitalist state. How can you bring them together to be one country, not two countries, one system, but one country with the same beliefs and values and policy goals? How can you bring them together across every part of public life? What does it look like? What could it look like? I'll explain to you how I think that would look like and how it can happen. But as I've only got half an hour to speak and then some time for questions, it's going to be rather short. So you'll have to read the book, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Please buy the book, or please get hold of a book. I'm sure copies will be available somehow in the university library or something. So, I need... Right, so I don't need to say much here. I have been here before probably and mentioned this, but we are based in Geneva, which is where the UN institutions in Europe are based, and also in Cambridge, UK, where I live. And our special focus we call relational connectivity. We're interested in relationships. I'll explain why in a moment. And how relationships connect people and the kinds of relationships which Christians are looking for. And we have done 5 years of work in Korea so far. And let's go the other way, don't I? So, if I explain the Christian basis first, now obviously we're working with North Korea as well as South Korea. So the book has got no Christian language in it, because it's got to go to North Korea as well as South Korea. And that is a challenge, of course, to be able to talk about life in South Korea and life in North Korea. And you may not like the book in some ways, because I'm quite critical in the book about South Korea as well as North Korea. I don't think that unification can happen by North Korea changing to become like South Korea. I think if that happened, actually, I think it would be a bad thing, not a good thing. Because South Korea has its own major problems. And as young people particularly, you will appreciate the very low birth rate in your country, the lowest birth rate in the world, so few marriages, and so few children, is a terrible thing to happen to any country. So you will be wiped off the planet completely. There won't be any. There'll be 1 million Koreans within 100 years from now. Will be only 1 million left. I mean, it's in a nosedive. The population numbers are in a nosedive. And it's unsustainable as a country if we don't have children in the end, for the care of the elderly, for the workforce, for everything. The workforce will be halved already by 2060 at current rates, maybe even sooner. So you can't, 38 million people working now, 19 million people by 2060. Can you imagine within 40 years how that will devastate your whole society? So you need children. That means you need people to get married and have children. That means you must give people time. Time is the key factor. Not money, but time. Have people got time? Time is the scarcest resource, as I talk about that a lot. But the reason that relationships are so crucial is that the Bible is relational at every level. Our understanding of God as 3 persons, not one person by themselves in the universe talking to angels or something, but God talking within the Godhead. Covenant is a relational term. It's a long-term, stable, committed relationship. That is the language of the Old Testament, and then we have the New Covenant between Christ and the Church. And then we have the Old Testament law. Jesus says is summarized by 2 commandments: love God and love your neighbor. Love is a quality of relationship. That is the heart of it. Old Testament law is about love and relationship. You have to ask about every law. Ban on interest, for example, or the role of the state. how does that impact on the way people relate? That's the question. The cross is not a military event like Islam with their conquering armies. The cross, the center of our faith, is about what? What is the language of the New Testament? It's forgiveness and reconciliation. It's about the healing of relationships. That is the heart of our faith. That is God's primary purpose in the universe, is to heal the relationship between himself and humanity and between people. We must forgive the North Koreans for what they've done. We must forgive other countries for what they did to our country here in Korea in 1945 by dividing it up. The great powers simply divided up Korea between them. And we have to forgive nations and forgive individuals and forgive people who hurt us. And the church, after all, is an eternal community. It's the household of faith in John's Gospel particularly. So everywhere the language is relational. That is what Christianity is about. It's not about finance primarily, it's about relationship. And biblical love, biblical law, biblical love is God's design for the ordering of society. And I know many people wish to equate capitalism with Christianity, but I really believe capitalism is deeply individualistic. It's not really fundamentally about relationships. As it says, it's about capital, which is money. I'm an economist. I understand the language. It's distinct from the ordering of the church. How you order society is different, because in the church, in Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, it's about our attitudes. But you can't legislate for attitudes. You can only legislate for behavior. Don't commit adultery, don't murder. You can legislate on those issues, but you cannot legislate on, don't hate somebody. I mean, how do you legislate for that? Because we don't have thought control, thankfully, yet. It may come soon. And reform of society for Christians is not through power, it's not through political power, it's through service. That's our fundamental proposition. So we want to reform society, but not through wielding power. We have to go through political institutions, definitely. But we don't do it through controlling those institutions and forcing it on people. That's not how we reform and change society. It's bottom up. Christian identity is about salt, which is about cleansing from things that are wrong in society, and it's about light, which is setting an example. And the application of biblical law to today, it reflects the character of God, it defines righteousness. Righteousness is right relationships. Every time you read the word righteousness in the Bible, think right relationships. Between nations, US and China, North Korea, South Korea, whatever, between states. Look at the principles underlying those laws and the institutions they are creating. The institutions is a word used by economists in a slightly technical way. An institution is the institutions are the rules governing the behavior of organizations. Institutions are the rules governing the behavior of organizations. It's all in my book, by the way. And biblical law, I believe, prepares the way for the kingdom. Jesus said in Matthew 5:19, those who teach and obey the law will be great in the kingdom. What is the link between law and kingdom there? Well, I think if you bring right relationships, righteousness in society, if you teach people to think not in individualistic terms, but in relational terms, if that's what you do, if you teach people to think like that, in relationship terms, not as individuals, or not in financial terms, it's not just about money, it's not about my achievement, it's about my relationships. If that's what God is measuring in a society and in our personal lives, if that's what God's passion is for our relationships, if we teach those things across society, if we change the education system, the health system, the financial system, the corporate governance arrangements, the education, every part of society, the justice system, to think in those terms, then when people hear the gospel, they understand it much more easily, because the gospel is a relational message. It's about having a relationship with Jesus. It's not like a badge. It's not like a political stamp of approval. It is a relationship with Christ. If you have that relationship, a real relationship with Christ, you're a believer. But if you don't, I don't care if you go to church or what, you're not connected to God. You're not really a Christian without that relationship. So I think you know all that stuff, but I'm reminding you to try and think of it in those terms. So MCDS stands for Mutual Convergent Development Strategy, or mutually agreed. So it's going to be agreed by North and South Korea. Mutually agreed convergent development. So we're talking about two societies moving together over a period of time. We are suggesting 5 phases. I'm going to take you through the phases in a moment, very quickly, but it's 5 phases. And it aims to build trust between North Koreans and South Koreans. There's so little trust now, and trust is a relationship term, isn't it? It's about how much you're prepared to open up and talk about what's really going on in your life. And nations have got to trust each other. So they, at the moment, you know, there's such a lot of distrust. So a North Korean says something, or a South Korean leader says something, and the other side automatically interprets it in a hostile way, not in a friendly way. But trust means, if you trust somebody and they say something that seems to be nasty to you, you think, oh, I must have misunderstood it. I can't have understood that properly. So then you have to rethink it again and say, well, actually, what did they mean? Or let me go and ask them why they said that. Instead of thinking, oh, he's insulting me again. But at the moment, it's insults is the only thing that people hear. They think everything is an insult. So, although the relationship is bad between the US and North Korea, we think the only way for peace in Korea is to work on the relationship between North and South Korea. That's the only way we're going to achieve peace. And if you do that, you will sort out the relationship between North Korea and the US. But that's the only way to do it. And one of my phrases that I like at the moment I'm thinking about is, there is no way to get denuclearization of North Korea without reunification of the peninsula. There's no way that North Korea will denuclearize. No way. Because they always are reminded of Libya. What happened in Libya? They denuclearized, and then America and Britain bombed them to nothing. I'm ashamed to say. So they play that on their central television every month, according to Chan Mo-park, who's the president of PUST, the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, who wrote a lovely supportive quote for our book, because he's also been a president in a South Korean University of Science and Technology. He's a lovely man. And he thinks that this is a really powerful way that we have suggested for how to bring about reunification. And I had also a lovely quote from Yongchun Park in the book, which when you look at the book, you'll find his quote there as well. So how do you build trust? Now this is another 3-hour talk here. So in 30 seconds, you demonstrate mutual respect. Don't think of North Korea as just rubbish. They're just guilty of human rights. There's nothing good about them. They're just rubbish. No. Read my book and you see that they're Koreans. They're like you guys. They think carefully, systematically. They work really hard. I mean, they've got huge brains and they're very capable people. They're not just good at building nuclear weapons. They're really good at thinking issues through and putting them into practice. You admire, when you read what is in that book, you realize how much they've achieved, really, with all the sanctions and all the other problems they've had, and the very many disadvantages of living in a communist state as well. But you can see this Korean character of hard work and application and thought is there in North Korea. You can see it very clearly when you read the book. And you then start to respect them much more deeply. It's important to respect North Korea. And I think the world respects South Korea enormously. You're the only country in 60 years that has gone from one of the poorest 10 countries to one of the 10 richest countries in the World Bank Index. I mean, no other country has achieved anything near that in 60 years. You are respected all over the world for your amazing achievements. But I think you know the social cost has been incredibly high, as your birth rate demonstrates. And so many of your wonderful, great universities will disappear simply because there aren't children to occupy the seats in the classes, which is just terrible. And your language is not, by the way, easy to learn. I'm sorry to tell you. But then nor is mine, so you need opportunities for contact, you need the face-to-face meetings, and you need to identify your shared values and policy goals. So we have a change equation. My wife is a counsellor, and she suggested to me that this is the thing she uses in counselling when she's trying to work out whether someone's really willing to change in their relationship with some other person in counselling. Because counselling is all about relationships, actually, but at a personal level. So we have great arguments, yes, discussions at meal times, my wife and I. So dissatisfaction, the level of dissatisfaction, plus the vision you have for the future, plus the first steps being feasible, have got to be greater than or equal to the cost of change. So if you're going to get change, there's got to be a level of dissatisfaction with how things are. There's got to be a vision for what the future could be. And there's got to be a feasible first step. I can't do much about the level of dissatisfaction. So why should DPRK change? Well, I think so far what's been offered to North Korea is not big enough to persuade them to change. It's no good US wagging the finger and saying you must denuclearize. Why? What benefit are we going to get? Oh, totally denuclearize, and then we, the US, will give you all this money. Will you? Will you keep your promise? New president comes. Oh, I didn't honor that old president's promise. US is really bad, and so is Britain, really bad about keeping promises. We promised Crimea, we promised Ukraine after they denuclearized that we would protect their borders. Russia moves in Ukraine, what do we do? Nothing. US did nothing, Britain did nothing. And in the US press, I looked everywhere to see somebody comment, well, surely in 2014, when Russians moved in, we should have honoured our commitment. Did anybody comment in the British press? No. Not a single word or item of comment. We broke our promise and nobody cared a damn. I'm sorry, that's the truth of the matter. So why should DPRK trust the US to keep its promise? Growing internal pressures. Don't underestimate the pressures inside. Information. So many books, papers, CDs from South Korea television. All these things have flooded into North Korea. They sent out so many people to earn money to fund the nuclear program. When they all came back again under UN sanctions, what did they come? They came back and they said, actually guys, it's not so bad overseas. It's actually much better than we had life here. And all that news is all over North Korea now. You can't stop it. Information travels. However much you have surveillance, everything, you can't stop the information. It travels. So, the internal pressures are growing in North Korea, don't underestimate it. And now they have South Korea wanting nuclear weapons. So how long will Pyongyang have an advantage in the nuclear weapons program? 5 years? 10 years maximum? I mean, South Korea's got so much money to fund it compared to North Korea. They're going to catch up very, very quickly with this technology. So whether they import the nukes from America or whether they develop their own, I don't know which way it will go, but it's a race against time now for Kim Jong-un. He knows he will lose the military race. Within 10 years, 15 years, he needs an answer. He needs a way out. And that's a risk factor. His risk factor is how much sanctions exemptions can he get for how much denuclearization. He won't totally denuclearize, but he might stop firing missiles. How much can I get if I promise not to fire missiles? But there's no way for him to test that. There's no way for him to find out what the deal might be from the US. And he doesn't want to be the first to ask, because that would show weakness. He wants the US to come and say, look, if you do this, I will do that. I cannot persuade the State Department to do that. I've been and spoken in the US Institute of Peace twice. I've been to speak to the think tanks over there. You cannot get inside the State Department. It's like a sort of fortress for outsiders. But I had one State Department person who came to my talk at US Institute of Peace. But I cannot persuade the State Department to take the first move. Even under Trump, where I had access to the very top advisors to President Trump, I could not get them to make the first move. So, what would be a vision for a reunified Korea? Just a moment. I'm going to skip this one and simply go to this because it's the easiest way to explain it. So I think you know the French Revolution slogan, liberté, égalité, fraternité. So if liberté, freedom, is the kind of war cry of the US and capitalism, it's all about my freedom. If égalité is about the distribution of resources fairly across society, at least that's the intention. Actually, North Korean society is extremely unequal, even more unequal than South Korean society. Actually, the numbers seem to show that. As far as one can tell, it's difficult to be sure, but that's how it goes. But there is a third option, fraternity. And we're suggesting that fraternity is about community, it's about relationship. And we're suggesting that South Korea has to move from its focus on the individualism of capitalism, and North Korea has to move away from its communism and its socialism, and both of them have to come to a third option. So both have to change. That's the argument in the book. They both have to change. And by the way, I think I will leave the slides with Youngchun Park, so if anyone wants the slides for this talk, they can get the slides to go over them again and discuss them. I hope you will, if you have time for that. And of course, there are going to be copies of this summary. Some people who came early got a summary of the book. If my book arrives safely, as God willing it will, in time for the launch tomorrow, this book formally will be launched in Seoul. Tomorrow, if the books arrive, they're 600 pages, so quite big books. But this summary, which is very short, it's 12 pages, I will have lots of spare copies, which I will give to Youngchun Park, and he can make sure they're available around the Reunification Center. Thank you. So, the other idea we came up with as a way to think about this was, I don't know if you know that France and Germany nearly went to war with each other in 1949 about the resources of the Ruhr area which lies between France and Germany. They nearly went to war. But it was prevented actually by a Christian coming up with an idea. And the idea was to form a European coal and steel community in 1951. It happened in 1951. But the idea came in 1949. The French foreign minister was a Christian, and so was Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany at that time. They were both believers, and this idea came from a Christian group called Moral Rearmament, and they fed in this idea, and it came into being in 1951 as the European Coal and Steel Community, which in 1957 became the European Economic Community, which I grew up with in my childhood, and then we had the Common Agricultural Policy as well thrown in, and then eventually you reach European Union today. It's a form of confederal Europe, actually. Now, could you use the same idea in Korea? Could you? So we suggested the first step towards reunification would be a Korean Peninsula agriculture community. Not a coal and steel community, because North Korea and South Korea don't have adequate stocks of coal and steel for this purpose, but you could have an agricultural community, so what would be traded? Well, North Korea could sell to South Korea a lot of fish or marine products, because they have a huge amount of that and they can't export it to China anymore because of sanctions. So let it come here, maybe. And also nuts. They have about $150 million a year of nuts that come out of their forests, which South Koreans would eat or re-export or whatever they do. And then you have a lot of kimchi cabbage, which at the moment comes from China. $200 billion a year of cabbage for making kimchi comes into South Korea. You love that kimchi, as you all know, but it comes from China at the moment. But actually, I'm told, on good authority, that the producers prefer to have North Korean kimchi cabbage, which comes from near Kaesong, that area. And so instead of growing that kimchi cabbage and sending it to China, they could send it to South Korea, and South Korea could pay for that with improved seeds, improved livestock animals, agrochemicals, farm machinery and equipment, pumps, tractors, all those sorts of things, to help the agricultural sector get moving in South Korea. So, in North Korea. So, you could see a very helpful trade between North and South Korea, and for the currency, to prevent it giving North Korea hard currency for their nuclear program, particularly to satisfy the Americans, but it's an important issue. A very leading South Korean economist with the IMF formerly, and also my friend on my board who was also a senior IMF economist, they helped us design an inter-Korean won. It's an exchange of currencies by the central banks, effectively, to start with. That's all it is, but it's described on the Relational Peace Building Initiative's website. If you go on that website, you'll find a paper on this as to how exactly that works. But effectively, you started a movement towards a shared currency, because what happens is that it pays North Korea to start to adjust their prices towards world markets, so that they can get as much for their fish and their nuts out of South Korea as possible. As long as they underprice everything, as they do at the moment, they're not going to get the full value of those products in their imports. So you start to create a common currency. And I think you know in Europe how important the euro was to bring about the pressure for unification in the EU. And you have a jointly appointed high authority. So in Europe, 6 countries in the end joined the initial European Coal and Steel Agreement. So it was France and Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and then also Luxembourg, and there's one more, Belgium. So they all gave a particular group of people as administrators the job of organizing the trade, dealing with the trade problems, all the things that come up when you start to trade between countries that have been enemies. But also, their responsibility was to drive this forward to bring about European Union. Ever closer union was the goal right from the start. And the goal of this group of people was to drive that process forward. And I'm suggesting you have a Korean Peninsula Authority. But this, by the way, this jointly appointed high authority is now called the European Commission. You may have heard of the European Commission. That's how it started, out of this trade agreement between Germany and France. I'm suggesting a jointly appointed high authority should be set up, a Korean Peninsula Authority, to drive forward the process of growing from agriculture to all products. So North Korea exports its minerals and its textiles. South Korea exports its telecommunications equipment, its IT equipment, its vehicles, its transport, all the things that North Korea need to get their economic modernization going. But they'd have to give some more. To get the sanctions exemptions, they'd have to move further along the road towards denuclearization. But I don't think they'll ever give it up, that's the point. But they'll move down that road, and it will kind of give the world a breathing space and make the Americans very happy. So, I think this is achievable. So, then the book goes through these chapters. It looks at what could be shared institutions and policy goals, shared values and institutions and policy goals within this relational worldview for industry, energy and the environment, for corporate rules, the rules governing how companies operate, and what the financial institutions look like. So the book is a bit long because it has to say, well, what does it look like in South Korea for each sector? What does it look like in North Korea in each sector? And then, okay, so what could be the shared values? What could be the shared institutions? And what could be the shared policy goals? So every subject has to go through laboriously that process for each one. So that's stage 2. Stage 3, he does this for families. What is the ideal form of family in a relational society? It's discussed carefully in the book, and I happen to have done a lot of work in the past on family policy in other countries. Rural communities includes agricultural policy, but we now don't talk about agriculture policy. It's about people. It's about the rural communities. That's where the focus should be. How do you design agricultural policy for the benefit of the rural communities and the national community as well? And then urban communities, what is the role of the local urban community and the city as a community of communities, and also the health system? How does the local structure of government impact on the way you deliver and design health delivery? How does that change the way health delivery is done in North Korea and South Korea particularly? How would it change it? Then, the 4th stage, I'm now imagining 15 years from now to get through that, you have stage 4, which is where you have 2 states, but 1 state but 2 systems. It's a confederation, but as now, North Korea has not yet relinquished its control, and South Korea government has not released control, but they start now to build national unity. You now need to get the media. You need to have a single national media in Korea. Let's get rid of all the bad language about North Korea and South Korean media and vice versa. Let's get one media. Let's have a unified education system, shared goals for education, and shared institutions. So we examine the education system. How difficult would it be to bring them together, especially the issue of curriculum? That's a big issue. History. How do you teach history to North Korean and South Korean students in a way that is not antagonistic to each other? And then we look at a unified justice system, which is where I had so much help from Dr. Cho's wife. Thank you again, madam. So, how do you do that? And then the 5th stage is a Korean Federation of Provinces. So we're suggesting a possible form of ultimate political solution. Only to show it's possible, you may come up, you Koreans, they don't need us by then at all. I mean, we're out of the picture, I'm sure, long before this. I don't know how long we will be involved at all, because the Koreans are quite able to do things. Once they get the idea, they can, of course, do it. But if they want my idea on what it could look like, well, we set it out there. But there are 2 important things about it, which is that it's a federation of provinces. It's like Switzerland. It's a model of democracy based on Switzerland and the cantons. So it's not one person, one vote once every 4 or 5 years. These decisions are all being made. The budget is all being spent. A large part of the budget is being spent at a provincial level. Now, you've got a long way down this road in South Korea already, but I think you need to go quite a lot further in this vision of a unified Korea. And Korea needs to be multi-connected, politically, economically, and ideologically. And we're suggesting that if there's going to be some solution to the growing confrontation between the US and China, which threatens the world now, with a nuclear war or something terrible in the future, I think we must think about how countries like Korea can be multi-connected, connected to US sphere of influence, connected to Chinese sphere of influence, connected to Russia as well. these countries must be able to say, look, we're holding the middle ground here, and we want to be connected to all of you. We don't want to be just with one or the other. We want to be connected to all of you. So, I think President Moon was trying to achieve that, but he didn't know how, so he talked about strategic ambiguity. This is a better way, a much better way to get to that point, because it makes Korea ideologically not committed to the US. President Yoon has come in and said, we're only going with the US. But China will bite you for that. I don't know when or how, but Xi Jinping will hurt you badly for this at some point if you don't change, in my view. He will punish you to say, look, you must realize who's the boss around here. 1/3 of your exports go to China. You're an export-dependent economy. You absolutely depend on exports, and 1/3 go to China. Don't insult your biggest client, your biggest customer. Don't insult them. Because if you do, why should they go on taking your goods like that? They'll make alternative arrangements or something. So, I don't know how this is going to play out, but there's no way US can fill that gap. I think US takes 12% of South Korean exports. And there's no way they can provide enough money to fill that gap. They can't, and they won't. So you're in for a rocky ride, I think, unless there are some changes. But there is a definite need for forgiveness, and this is why my personal statement as a Christian comes in the book. I say, I am a Christian. And as a Christian, I am saying to you that you must forgive the wrongs of the past. North Koreans must forgive and South Koreans must forgive. There have been many, many, many wrongs. Many families have not been able to visit their relatives in North Korea because North Korea won't allow them in. Those are terrible wrongs, and to forgive them is very hard for those families. I don't underestimate that. But Jesus forgave us when we were deep in our sin and were in rebellion against him, and if he forgave us, we must forgive them. Now, so that's the 5 stages of the mutual convergent development strategy, and I think I've run out of time, so I shall have to stop there if you want to have any questions at all. But the rest of the slides you'll see go through with the benefits or arguments in favour of this to all the different actors: North Korea, South Korea, US, China, Russia, Japan. Why would they all accept these ideas? If I had another hour, that's what you'd hear from me. Next visit, young children. So, I'm going to stop there and see if you have, there are still a few minutes for questions. So, if anyone wants to ask a question after that rather hurried presentation, yes. I can hear you well, so proceed.
You're quite multinational and very comprehensive, but I'd like to focus on the third phase. You mentioned the word communities.
Yeah.
So urban communities, rural communities, and I think community is a very difficult concept. It's not an easy concept. So how can we create the sense of community, individual level or the local level? Do you have any specific ways for that? That's the first question. The second question is, since my background is education, you talked about many political and economic level of cooperation. What would be the role of education in that?
In what?
In this every phase of cooperation.
Every phase of cooperation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, very brief answers. Whether it's the family or the community, institutions depend on having function. They must have a job to do. So what jobs would I imagine giving? to communities. And the book suggests primarily, I can think of immediately two, there may be many more in the book, but one is to deal with litigation on human rights. Because we are arguing the whole human rights agenda needs to be changed to what we call relational rights. So there's a book on relational rights. You'll find it on another website, relationalresearch.org. Download it free. There is a copy that I'm giving to Yeongchun Park. I'm hoping to get them printed in Korea and Korean soon, but anyway, for the moment. But it's really shaking up the UN because a lot of the ambassadors love this from many different countries, love this idea of relational rights, and a lovely Chinese Christian lady called Emily Ho primarily was the writer of that book. But it does say that we don't define our identity individually, we design it through our interdependence with other people, which the Chinese realize, the Indians know, the Africans know, it's only the Americans who don't seem to know, and the Europeans. So then litigation on rights would be done in the context of the relationship in which the offence was meant to have occurred, to look at the rights and responsibilities on both sides, litigation and community level. First thing. Second thing is, we think the health system, local communities can play a much bigger role in the health system than they do at the moment. In South Korea, for example, in terms of caring for old people, providing the social welfare, making sure old people take their pills every day, whatever it is, cut their toenails, I mean, all the things that they talk about under social welfare. A lot of those things should happen in communities, and also so many of people's illnesses when they get older, particularly, but also through life, is very much about how much of a sense of loneliness they've got and how much community they have. And coming to the role of education, I had some long arguments here with KEDI, the Korean Education Development Institute, because I believe the South Korean education system is really unhelpful in some respects. I know it has high achievement levels, but the point is teaching the individual to focus on their individual achievement, not on cooperation. It's about competition. It needs to be balanced with cooperation. We need both. We need competition to produce excellence, but we need cooperation. We also need relational literacy. So that idea is explored as well in the book, in the chapter on education. Please read it, and look at particularly the chapter on education and the idea of relational literacy. So we're suggesting that all South Koreans in schools should be taught how to relate to a North Korean, because the culture is so different. So if North Korean students come to South Korean universities like Handong, which is my prayer that they will soon do for their education, will the South Korean students here know how to receive them, how to relate to them and make them feel welcome from their different culture? And there are lots of examples we've explored in Australia particularly of how to bring in other cultures into the education system. There's a big relational schools project in Australia. Look up relationalschools.org, it's another activity. And also, how do you relate to your parents? How do you relate to your brother or sister? Your siblings? How do you relate to people of the other gender? I mean, we need to teach relational literacy. And how do you relate to Americans? It's a big challenge, or Chinese. So all of these skills need to be taught in schools. One more question, Louise, have to stop. Yes?
First of all, thank you so much for taking your time and all the prayers and the studies that you have contributed on this peninsula. So thank you. My name is Jean Adelher. I'm third year at law school. We learn American law. I found it very interesting that you mentioned about reconciliation and the forgiveness because, personally I was a missionary trainee to French African countries in France, and we pray for Central Republic of Africa, which the country has experienced a lot lately, and we've been intercessing for the breakthrough in the country, and they actually, one of the keen missionary was actually talking to the new government and prayed for the Ministry of Reconciliation. So I think we have a lot to learn from that country model. My question is one of our alumni, graduate of Hills, had presented the vision that you mentioned about European Union, the initial stages, and she's actually working in Pohang. It's called Northern East Country something, and they have quite the same vision for the unification process. So I was wondering and they are located in Pohang. So I was wondering, I guess there are many aspects of within the country and outside of the country attempting to bring peace in the peninsula, but then even for Christians from the North Korean defectors are attending different church, and we don't even go to the same church. They have their own North Korean community in church. So I feel like
yes. Again, I have to intervene because I have to stop. But you see, even there, you used language which was, forgive me saying so, I know it wasn't intentional, but it was very unhelpful because you called them defectors. When there's a migrant from Mexico into the US, do we call them defectors from Mexico? No, they are usually economic migrants. Emigres, maybe they don't agree with the regime, but a lot of them are just economic migrants. When I talk to the transitional justice team, working here with the North Korean, quotes, defectors, they say they haven't actually rejected their government. That isn't what made them flee away. No, they were trying to simply get a better life. That's why they came across the river, on the Tumen River when it's frozen. That's why they cross over there and come into South Korea or into China and come this way into South. They're not actually defectors, so let's not use the word defector and label them like that. And let's also, if we understand better what life is like in North Korea and both the strengths and the weaknesses of their system, we will know much better how to relate to them and show them some respect. Because at the moment, I think in South Korea, you somehow feel, we're powerful, we're successful, and you've just come from a country of junk. So there's no respect. We'll help you because we're kind and you're the poor and we'll help you with the poor. But they're not looking for being treated like the poor. They're wanting to be treated as Koreans with respect. And I think that's a really important starting point if you want to integrate them into South Korea well. You must show them respect, and to do that you must understand their society a bit better. So please ask them to read my book. Please spread the news around because we just need people, and it's going to be translated into Korean. It's already, there's a first draft, and we're needing just to refine the first draft. And then we're hoping to, again, change it into the North Korean dialect. But if you go on our website, you'll find all of our documents are in English, in North Korean, in South Korean, and in Mandarin, in those 4 languages. And that's intentional, because we know the North Koreans are accessing our website as well. Anyway, I hope I've said enough. Thank you very much.